Indeed. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
People who are waiting, trickle in here. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I think we'll get started. Welcome to the December Potpourri meeting. Generally, December meetings are a little shorter and a little less well attended for obvious reasons, but I think we've got some interesting chats tonight. So we'll move right ahead. There'll be a few announcements later, and we'll talk a little bit about what 2022 looks like. But right now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. He's our do-it-yourselfer guy. And tonight, Fred Benedikt is going to talk about collimating his Newtonian telescope. Now, he's given some talks recently on upgrading his scope with a new focuser, and tonight he's going to talk about collimating it for its, I guess, best possible performance. So, Fred, if you want to share and present, and I know that Fred is also going to talk about a donation he's going to make to the club. I think it has 4 wheels and it has a sort of a Linux logo on the front, but I'll let him clarify that a little later.
This is more the economy model.
Yeah, right.
All right, so collimation, I've actually spoke to a few people, and a lot of people seem to be afraid of it. And I was sort of afraid of it at the beginning too, till I kind of realized, oh, what was going on. So I really needed to do a good collimation because they were updated to a 2-inch focuser. And before I drill all sorts of big holes in my optical tube assembly, I needed to make sure that my focuser was in the right place. So I spent extra time trying to collimate it properly. So what am I going to talk about? Well, when do you need it? You need to have some collimation tools and jigs, or else you can't do anything. There's really only 3 steps to collimation. It's really not that complicated. People, when you read, kind of overcomplicate things. And I'm going to talk about 4 different methods. And it really depends from some very simple tools to something a little bit more complex, but anybody can do it. And then I'll give you some final thoughts. So that we're all on the same page, so that everybody knows what a Newtonian reflector is. This is where the light comes from the big opening in the end, gets past some kind of a spider assembly that holds a secondary holder that's got an elliptical mirror on it. The light passes onto your primary mirror, bounces off the secondary, and goes up to your eyepiece and focuser. And there's nothing more complicated than that. But this has got a whole bunch of adjustments. The mirror has fewer adjustments. The primary mirror has fewer adjustments. And generally, the focuser has got absolutely no adjustments. It's fixed by the manufacturer. So the movements that you can have on a secondary mirror, which you kind of all have to touch if you want to do an alignment, is you can move the secondary mirror in and out laterally. You can rotate it, you can tilt it, and you can place it centrally within the tube. So you got to take care of all these things. And of course, everybody remembers from their, high school physics, that if you have an elliptical surface viewed at 45 degrees, it presents as a circle. And that's what you're going to see in your focuser, is a circle. And on your primary mirror, you generally have 3 sets of screws that are sort of work in a kind of a push-pull arrangement. And that's how you tilt your mirror. And of course, the focuser has got very few adjustments, no adjustments. So when's collimation needed? You can do a very quick check by just looking in your focuser without any eyepiece, and just look down and see what you see. And if you start to see things that are very central, and we'll get into what you're looking at in a little bit more detail later. But if you see things that are very central with the bottom of your focuser, and you see your secondary mirror all nice and center, and you see your eyeball bouncing back, you're pretty well collimated. You can use a dust cap or a collimation cap with a hole drilled in it. And if you could also put that in, and if you see something like this, where this is where you see the bottom of the focuser, here you see your secondary mirror, but you see some things that are off center. Well, if you see something like that, you do have to collimate. Something's not right. You can also do a quick star test. Now, this never really works for me. You just go to high magnification, defocus the star, and look at the diffraction gratings. But with our terrible atmosphere that we have here, generally these diffraction rings are basically, they're boiling, so they're really not that useful. And one day I might actually make myself a little artificial star, but that's down the road. So a lot of people have a what they call a sight tube or Cheshire eyepiece. This is something that was developed by Professor Cheshire in the early 1900s, and it's a great tool to check if you need collimation. And it has an advantage of having sort of a crosshair, which marks the center of everything. And again, we'll go into more detail later, but if you see something like this, you need to collimate, and you need to make some adjustments. So there's lots of people who have written articles and tomes about how to collimate, what to collimate, when to collimate, and Mel Bartels is sort of one of those architects. He's sort of an amateur telescope maker, and he's written lots of articles. Niels-Olof Karlin from Sweden is another one of these people who's written lots of articles about how to collimate, but you know, they just drive me crazy, because I think they're making it far too complicated. It just kind of wants to make me scream. So what I really found out is collimation is really not that difficult. It's really not that painful, and it really only has 3 basic steps, which I'm going to talk about in sort of detail. But, and here's the big but, you got to follow the steps in sequence. You got to repeat the steps due to interaction, and you keep making space smaller and smaller adjustments. You got to have some kind of collimation tools, alignment tools. You really can't do without it. Although, if you have a very basic scope, I'll show you a way of doing it. And thing that I lack a lot of is patience. You need a lot of patience. And what I found out is you got to make your life easier. And by that is you really have to make sure that your primary is center spotted. I don't know if my scope was so old that it didn't have a center spot, and I had to put it on. You should also make sure that you just have a minimal amount of tools that you need. So you don't need screwdrivers. You just basically use hand tools. So I can adjust things with just no tools at all. I can tighten and loosen things. I can tighten and loosen things on the secondary without any tools. And that really makes life easier. Plus you need some jigs if you want to do it too. So here's the tools that you need, and it's a variety. It can be as simple as a collimation cap, and this works if you've got a 3 or 4 inch Newtonian, you know, that's f8 or something. This will actually do it. If you can still find a 35mm film can, which I think is probably obsolete, you can use that. You can use a Cheshire eyepiece, and that's sort of the one go-to tool that works for everything. Also talk about how to use your laser. This is sort of a straight laser. And I'll talk also about using a laser with a target and a Barlow. And there's some advantages to using that over just the simple straight laser. And I've got, of course, some tools and jigs that I've made over time. And I find the most useful is even on my laser, I put targets at the bottom, or on my Barlow laser, I also have extra targets. And the more targets you hit, the better your collimation. And of course, you need some tools. Now, I happen to have some machinist tools, because one of the things you have to do is you have to center your secondary holder within your optical tube assembly. I mean, you can use woodworking tools, you can use tape measures, just use whatever you happen to have at hand, but you have to center the secondary as a start. And then you can make yourself some masks. I find masks are useful. Anyway, 3 steps. What's your goal? Well, the goal is you want your focuser and eyepiece optical axis and the primary mirror optical axis all to be coincident, to fall one on top of one another. And I'll show you what that means a little bit later in some other slides. And you got to go to step number 1. And what's step number 1? You have to make sure that your secondary is aligned to your focuser. That is, the secondary is placed centrally below the focuser. That's step 1. Step 2, you now have to align the secondary so that it points basically to the primary, so that while it's still centered below the focuser. And then step 3 is you aim the primary back to the focuser eyepiece center. And really step 3 is the one that's done most frequently. If you do your collimation right, step 1 and step 2 is hardly ever touched. So what do we mean by optical axis are coincident? Well, if you have your focuser and you have the center of the focuser pointing to the center of your secondary, they're coincident. But the secondary may not be pointing to the center of your primary. And of course, if it's not pointed to the center of the primary, the reflection back is not going to be coincident. So the trick is you have to get them coincident. So here's the steps, and we'll go into more detail later. But step 1 is you have to center your secondary below your focuser. And then step 2 is you aim the secondary so that it hits the center of your primary. And then step 3 is you tilt your primary so that it goes back to the center of the secondary, back to the center of your focuser and your eyepiece axis. And those are the only 3 steps that you're doing. But how do you do this? Now, there's people have written all sorts of stuff about what you see, and I find it very confusing. So I just do 1 step at a time. And here's what I mean by doing 1 step at a time. So here's method number 1. with a simple peep scope or a 35mm film can where you've drilled basically a 1/16 of an inch hole. So if you look at it, you might see something like this in the peep scope. And what are you looking at? Well, you see here's the bottom of the focuser. Here's the secondary mirror. And the secondary mirror is not central to the focuser, so it's off. And then you also see a reflection of the primary, and that's also not centered within the secondary. So what's step number one? Step number one is you center the secondary in the focuser. So you move whatever you need to get this secondary in the middle of your focuser. And we'll show you some controls to do that after. So that's step one. And you only concentrate on step one till you get this right. Then you can go to step two. That's where you now start to tilt and move the secondary so that you can see the primary, and that the primary is nice and centered within the secondary. And then once you've got that done, you may have to go back and forth between step one and step two a few times. Then you can go on to step three, which is you now tilt the primary mirror so that this moves to the center of the secondary, and then you get something like this. And that's with the collimation cap. One step a little further above that is if you use a Cheshire eyepiece, and that has an advantage. It has actually two advantages. One is it marks where the center of your focuser is, and the bottom of your eyepiece. And you also have this, which can reflect some ambient light back down the tube, so it helps you kind of see what some of the parts are. But it's the same three steps. So in this particular case, what we have is the secondary is already centered within the eyepiece. So that's the good first step. So now you have to move the secondary mirror to get it into the center also, to get it within the secondary. So if you see something like this, what it means is the secondary mirror has to be moved laterally a little bit this way, and it also has to be rotated a little bit to be on this axis. And if you do things like that, you'll get your primary mirror reflected in your secondary, and it's nice and central. And then of course you do the last step, which is you tilt your primary mirror to put everything into the center. And those are really the same three basic steps. Now, here's method number three. This comes from Starzona. I guess they're in Arizona somewhere. And you use these kind of collimation tools. You use the basic Cheshire, and now you can also use a laser. And the laser, you'll see, also has some advantages. Makes some things a little bit easier. But, and a big but, the laser has to be collimated. It has to be aligned so that when you rotate it, that the laser beam stays in position. And I've seen many lasers, as I rotate them, they don't stay in position. You have to collimate the laser before you can do any of the work. But it has the same basic three steps. So you align the secondary mirror using the Cheshire eyepiece, which I've shown you before. Now you stick in your laser, and instead of using a Cheshire, you use the laser. You basically just point the laser at the center of your primary mirror, and you'll see a little bit of example of that after. And the last step is you point the laser back onto itself into the focus center, and you'll hopefully the next couple of slides will make it a little bit clearer. And of course, you double check everything with the Cheshire when you're all done. So these are the moves that you can make to align the secondary. So now when you go to step two and you're trying to point the laser at the center of the primary, you have to, you might see something like this. So in step one, it's already, the secondary is already centered below the primary, below the focuser. And it's now in step 2, if when you put your laser in, you might see a dot here and it doesn't hit the center of the target. So now you adjust the secondary tilt or the rotation in order to get this in. Now I tend to only correct for about half the error. So in a case like this, you might end up having to rotate the secondary mirror, or you tilt it so that you kind of put this dot over here and then go back to step 1 and then go back to step 2. You kind of go back and forth a few times, getting ever closer to the center. And then, well, you have to go back and forth. And then finally, in the last step, when you're adjusting the primary mirror with the laser, now you want the laser beam to fall back onto itself and back onto where the source of the laser comes from. And I have sort of a bit of a better picture of that coming. And of course, you use the push-pull screws for that. So here's a case where I've got my laser. It's got a target here. So my laser, you see it hits the center of my primary. There's a bit of a reflection here, which is normal. And then that laser beam bounces back, and here's a dental mirror that shows it, and it bounces back to the source. So I've hit a couple of alignment points. So this is now sort of aligned. And then of course you check with the Cheshire. And the last method is, this comes from Rick Saunders from RASC in London. And I think Leslie liked this one. He uses some of the same tools, but there's a difference. He uses a laser collimator, which has a target and a Barlow. And there are some advantages to doing this, and which I'll hopefully try to explain. So I'm not going to go through all of these steps because all of the steps are the same, and there's a write-up, and I'll put a link to how you get to Rick's stuff. And it just gives a detailed description. But I'll just jump to the laser part. So with this laser part, you see a reflection of the reinforcing ring on your primary mirror, and this is a shadow, and you end up putting the shadow in the center of this target. And what's the advantage of using a Barlow laser? Well, this is something that Niels Ulf Carlin sort of, I guess, pulled out of a little hat, whereby your laser can be slightly misaligned. And the reason it can be misaligned is if you put the laser light here close to your Barlow, which is a negative lens, what happens is, and you turn it on, you get a diverging beam of light coming out of it. So it doesn't have to be as accurate as, let's see, do I have this here? It doesn't have to be as accurate as this laser, which has a point. So if you rotate it, if it moves a bit, you don't care. And you see a reflection of the shadow cast back onto your eyepiece focuser. And that's sort of kind of is the method. Now here's a picture of what I did. So you see, here's my laser collimator with my Barlow lens, which is a negative lens. And instead of getting a point source of light at the center, I illuminate the whole target in a light, in laser light, and that reflects back onto this target. And you see a shadow there, and that's this shadow of this ring. So that gets to the bottom of the Barlow laser. And then in my particular case, the light passes still straight through on the optical axis. So I have that now in the center too. So not only do I have this correct as a target, but I also have this correct as a target also. So now I'm really better optically aligned. I'm on axis. And finally, Rick doesn't go into this, but he says you see a secondary shadow here. And although he doesn't really address this, and we find that the secondary shadow is off center. And this really is for fast scopes like f5 or faster. And this is due to what they call the secondary offset. And if you follow those 3 alignment steps, you will automatically correct for the secondary mirror offset, which is another way of making sure that you get full illumination into your eyepiece, and you don't have to worry about how to move the secondary mirror to get this offset correctly, which is normally you move it slightly away from the focuser and you move it slightly towards the primary in order to achieve this offset, so that you get this secondary shadow here. Oops, you get this, my cursor's going. You get the secondary shadow here. So this is not centered, it's slightly off center, but that's correctly aligned for the offset. And if you ever wanted to do calculations, in my particular scope, which is a 6-inch f5, we're only talking of the secondary mirror moving about 1.5 millimeters. So it's really a very small amount. So you can either take it into account or not. It won't make much difference. So in summary, there's really only 3 steps to get everything coincident. The secondary is aligned to the focuser. That is, you place the secondary central below the focuser. Step 2, the primary, you aim the secondary to the primary center while it's still centered below the focuser. And step 1 and step 2, you have to kind of go back and forth. And with step 3, you adjust the 3 pairs of adjustments on your primary mirror to aim everything back to the focuser and eyepiece center. And this is the step that has to be done the most frequently. And Niels Ulf Carlin, of course, had a whole bunch of myths that he debunked himself, because it says you have to square the focuser accurately. Well, I tried doing that, and I did focus it squarely accurately, but didn't have to do it. The primary mirror has to be in the exact center of the optical tube. No, it doesn't have to be. It can be off a bit. The secondary mirror must not be offset, and that's a lie too. The laser collimator is the most accurate tool. No, that's a lie too. You can do everything with a Cheshire. The laser, if not the most accurate, then an autocollimator is, and that's sort of a laser. An autocollimator is a laser with a target. Instead of being with the rings, it has a mirror on it, so the light bounces back and forth even more, which would drive you crazy. And you should always finish collimation with a star, and that's a myth too. So methods 3 and 4, and I'll send out a link tomorrow. That's where you can get the instructions for how to do it, for those that are interested in following up. And my final thoughts is, don't worry about opening a can of worms, because you can, if you try your collimation, you can only improve the situation. You really can't make it any worse. You achieve collimation by tightening and loosening adjustment screws or nuts, depends on what you have. All screws and nuts should be snug when completed, right? You don't have to reef it down. It just should be snug, so that when you tap it, it goes back to the proper position. It doesn't shift. And you got to do small incremental repetitive adjustments to slowly get you to where you need to be. And after collimation, you will notice an improvement in image detail. And it's quite remarkable, actually, the improvement you'll see. And more importantly, you got to have patience, and you may not do it all in one go, but just do a little bit at a time. And that's my quickie presentation.
All right, thank you. A couple of questions here about the size of what is the size of the hole in the collimation cap?
About a 1/16 of an inch, 1.5 millimeters.
1/16 of an inch. There are different lengths of Cheshire tube. How do you know which one to use?
Different what? Lengths?
Lengths of the Cheshire tube.
Lengths?
Lengths.
Oh, lengths. Yes. generally what you would end up, let me see if I can get to, let me see if I can get to where, if you have a fast scope, you want the length to be a little shorter. Where is it? No. Where, can't find it. No, maybe it's back here. Here. Did I stop my share? You see my? Do you see my presentation?
Nope. You stopped.
Yes. Or, oh, I stopped. Okay. All right. Hang on. I don't know why I stopped the share. Come on. No, it doesn't work that way. I have to do here. From current slide. Okay. Some tubes, if you notice very carefully, they have a ridge. And if you have a faster tube, you generally want a shorter tube. And there are Mel Bartels and Olaf Carlin, they've got actually some calculations for the length of the tube based on your focal ratio of your scope. But what I find works best is you have to make sure that your crosshairs on your Cheshire are close to where your focal plane is of your scope, so that I guess how to explain it, so that the crosshairs is where your image would actually focus, and that's how you determine what the length of the tube is. And if you have a tube that doesn't have a ridge, you can actually slide that back and forth, but the differences are quite small. If your focuser is half decent, that's the other point. Your focuser has to be half decent mechanically. It can't wobble as you rack it in and out, because then your collimation will change. Does that answer the question? I don't know. Guess not.
I think so. I think so. Thanks very much, Fred. And
I was typing another question, so I didn't have time to say yes. That answered the question.
and
I'll just ask. Can I just ask my question because I was typing it?
Sure.
I understand some laser collimators themselves don't always come collimated, so you may need to I guess make a jig to check the collimation of the collimator itself.
Right, and actually many moons ago I showed a jig for how to do that, because this collimator, as you rotate it, right, that beam of light, as you project it, has to remain steady. It can't move.
Okay.
Right, and there are collimation screws, and if you look at this one very carefully, there's a collimation screw that you see here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's 3 screws on that, and there's probably 3 screws on that too. And you make either a V block and rotate it, and you project it onto your wall as far away as you can, like maybe 20-25 feet, however big your room is. And you rotate it in the V block, and the dot should be as steady as you can possibly make it.
all right, thanks a lot, Fred. And there's a lot of information in there, but the nice thing is we'll post this online, so if anyone ever has the job of collimating their Newtonian down the road, they can refer to this and be ever thankful to Fred's work to explain all this so clearly. Thanks again. All right, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Rick Veregin, and he's going to talk a little bit about his astrophotography well, I guess experiences, his processes, and recent photographic efforts. So I think there's going to be some, this is also going to be a talk about learning through I guess efforts to try to achieve some photographic success. So Rick, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Randy. So let me share my screen here.
Yep.
Okay, so you seeing me and hearing me now?
You are live, sir.
Oops. Okay.
Mike.
Yeah, so as Randy said, I'm going to share my deep sky astrophotography process and some of my recent photo examples. And it's important to note that I am in Bortle 8 city skies. I'm not really sure what Bortle means, but 9 is the worst light pollution you can get. So my skies are pretty brutal in terms of having a lot of light out there. And if you want to know your Bortle, if you don't know it, I found this nice site, Clear Outside, you can go to. So this is not a tutorial, unfortunately. It's just, I guess, to give you an idea of what's required or what I've been doing to get started in this hobby and work from a city sky, very bright city sky. So my own setup, I've got right now a Celestron 925 with a 0.63x reducer. So I'm imaging at prime focus with a reducer. So that is a 9.25 inch aperture, and I'm running at f6.3, which is still a little bit slow f ratio for deep sky, but it's as you'll see, you can do quite a lot with it. Right now I have a ZWO CMOS camera. It's an APS-C format, so it's not full frame, but a fairly large sensor, and it's the ASI 2600 MC Pro cooled. So it is a cooled camera. But I've also used very similar process in the past with my Canon 70D, and also I have a full frame Canon 6D, which is astro modified. So a lot of this that I'm talking about applies to a DSLR camera as well. I have 2 computerized go-to mounts. The photos I'm going to show you are from a Celestron CGX, but I recently got the Ioptron CME70 EC, which is a much better mount, much more expensive mount, which I've had only out once with all the bad weather recently. So I think one of the keys for me is how easy it is to get set up and bring everything in, because this whole contraption is like 80 pounds, and it's got lots of wiring and so on. So there's no way I'd want to put it together every night. I just wouldn't use it. So what I did is I built a home-built rollout dolly for the telescope, and I also built one as a laptop stand as well. And so I can just roll everything out and roll everything in. I also have an AstroZap dew shield, which is really necessary. Not only does it block a lot of the light from the side, but it also obviously prevents dew. So I have a nice long dew shield. And I also have a dew heater, which also is home built. So with Celestron, there's a nice little ledge just inside the optical tube, which is not in the way of the optics. And so I just have a little bit of plastic tubing with some resistors inside and a little 12-volt power supply. And basically I have a power bar built into the stand. And so I just have one electrical connection to make from my garage out into my driveway. So basically the procedure takes, maybe 30 to 40 minutes, which by the way is about the minimum I need to make sure the temperature is equilibrated inside the telescope, so we don't get too many air currents flowing around inside and messing up the collimation. So basically I roll out my telescope from my garage to my south-facing driveway. I rough sight in Polaris and level them out. So you have to kind of do both at the same time. And then I lift everything onto vibration pads, so I'm off of those wheels, so it doesn't obviously want to roll around, and it's very stable. And then I roll out the laptop stand and I connect my laptop to the camera. And for image capture, I use SharpCap Pro as the program. SharpCap itself is free, and I really recommend it if you have like a CMOS camera. It works really, really well. But paying for the Pro also enables a polar align module, which I find really amazing. So to polar align through the main telescope, it just analyzes the image around Polaris, shows me how to adjust the mount, and less than 10 minutes, I'm really accurately polar aligned. It's really very simple and works really well. So I've got it leveled, I've got it polar aligned. The only thing left then is you have to align to the stars. So my go-to mount knows where to go to, where those stars are. So I always do at least 3 stars using the hand controller. And then I focus. By this time, you know, we've got about 30 or 40 minutes, so I can focus. I use a homemade batten-off mask. I've included the website where it has instructions. But basically, you just take a piece of plastic or cardboard if you want, and you cut these grid-like pattern into the surface. And because the angles of these patterns from different parts of the objective, what you see is when you're in focus, you get these diffraction pattern, which is exactly symmetrical. If you're inside or outside focus, you get an asymmetrical pattern. So you can tell immediately when you're in focus, and it's really super straightforward. You can be focused just within a few seconds. It's really great. You can buy them, by the way, but they're you know, something like $100 or so. So you can save a lot by making it. So now we're all aligned. The telescope knows where it is. So I use the mount go-to to move my target. And now I move the laptop to my car. So this is my observatory for me. So I connect to the camera by a 30-foot active USB cable. It has to be an active cable because otherwise you're not going to get a good connection over 30 feet. And in winter, I have a little small electric heater in my car to keep warm. So basically, I can monitor the progress through the night from my car. And as you can see, I have a little laptop stand, which is just a piece of wood with some wire that hangs off the back of the front seat. So it makes it handy to hold the laptop there. Okay, and so this is what you see through SharpCap then in this image here. So I've centered in this case on NGC 1501. It's a planetary nebula, and this is an example of a 10-second exposure, and this is exactly what I see from SharpCap as it's capturing the images. So I do use less than 10 seconds sub-exposures typically. For one reason, the sky is really too bright for long exposures, especially for bright stars and bright objects. Everything just gets washed out. The second thing is I don't have guiding. You know, we have frequent clouds coming through the area, and we often have poor seeing here in Mississauga. So all of these things advantage using shorter rather than long exposures. Short exposures do introduce more read noise. Every time you read the camera sensor, you get noise with that reading. So the more times you have to read, the more noise. But fortunately or unfortunately, the bright sky totally dominates the noise for me. So certainly with 10-second exposures, the read noise is totally negligible with a CMOS camera. So I don't really have to worry about that. So it's really advantageous to use short exposures, and I just take a lot of them. So now I've got SharpCap taking these images, but it's really nice to be able to monitor what's going on. And to do that during the night, I monitor the sub-exposures with a program which is called Deep Sky Stacker. It is a free program as well. It calibrates, and I'll talk about that in a minute. it registers, so it registers the position of the stars in each image so that it can then stack them. That is, it can align them, those stars, and then sum the images together. So we take all these, say, 10-second exposures, we align them with each other, and then we stack them. So we add them together. And the things I monitor through the night, I watch the full width half maximum for focus and tracking. If we see changes in that, I know something is going on and I have to go and refocus, or I have to look at what's happening with tracking if the wind's picked up or something. I also look at the background level. It gives me a sky background and a number of stars. And that tells me if, you know, the clouds or some light hazes moving in, or if I've got dew or something happening there. In general, with the Celestron SCT telescope, it keeps focus really well if I've equilibrated it correctly and the temperature doesn't change too much during the night. Generally, I only need to refocus once every 3 hours or so. And often at that point, I'm changing targets or maybe doing a meridian flip or something anyway. It's not too onerous. So again, I just go outside with my laptop, put on my stand, do a refocus, do meridian flip, whatever, change targets, and then I go back into my car with the laptop. And I try to only go in when the clouds finally roll in or the sun's coming up, but not before. And so the nice thing, if you're up until 4 in the morning, is it only takes 5 minutes to roll everything and pack up. So that's the best part of easy setup. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about image calibration. So there's 2 other sets of exposures you do need to take for image calibration for deep sky photography. One is bias frames, and these are taken to look for sensor non-uniformities. All the pixels do not behave the same. And sometimes you see some pattern noise. I tend to see a pattern noise that's sort of along the diagonals of the sensor. And you can see some pixels are just bright all the time and so on. So basically what the bias frame does is it takes out all these non-uniformities in your background and levels out your background signal, your bias signal in the camera. And you only need to do these every 6 months or so. So what you do is you take 100 very short exposures in the dark, so no light, just to look at the sensor response and get rid of those uniformities, non-uniformities. The other thing you need is flat frames, which get rid of vignetting or dust bunnies. So if what you do here is your telescope is not evenly illuminated because of baffle tubes and so on and various obstructions in the telescope. So what you do is you need a very even light source. And what I have is a little A3 drawing pad, which is 17 by 13 inches. So it's large enough to do quite a large telescope. And I just put that right on top of my dew shield and take my flat frames. And I'm showing here what an average master flat frame looks like.
Kevin Veregin is speaking.
Hello? Was there a question?
No, go ahead, Pete. It's okay, Rick.
Okay, yeah, so this is an example of an average master flat, very exaggerated. I've really stretched this, but so generally you have darker edges and brighter in the center. So if you don't account for this, you have real trouble really getting to the faint signals in your image. Okay, so once you have those bias and flat frames, now we put all of that along with all the sub-exposures into Deep Sky Stacker. I usually end up with about 8 to 24 hours of exposure. So that means it's about 10,000 to 30,000 subs over many nights to get the sort of signal to noise I really want to get. So what I've done now at this point is I just have this raw image of raw data that has all this exposure in it, but you really can't see anything if you look at it. What you have to do is you have to develop the image, you have to stretch it and so on. And so to do that, I found this really nice tool called Star Tools. It enables you to do all those things: image development, stretching, color balance. It has a lot of special features: sharpening, deconvolution, and so on. So, but the cool thing about it, it's very step by step. Everything is on this screen. You just go through from one to the next through the list. It has a lot of defaults in it, and you can get something really decent coming out with hardly even touching the defaults. And then once you're more experienced, you can go in and you can do an awful lot to improve the image. So I really recommend it. It's about $50 US. I used to use Photoshop, and I tried, which was really hard to get anything decent. And I tried PixInsight, which is really hard to get anything decent. So I really like this. Now, there are some other things you can do as well. There's another free program called Registax, which planetary photographers use a lot, and it helps to sharpen and denoise the images. And again, this is a topic that would take pages to talk about, but basically it uses wavelets, which pull out the frequencies that are due to real signal and the frequencies that are due to noise, and it hides the noise ones and enhances the real signal. So it works really well to bring out detail and at the same time, keep a hold on noise in the image. But it does require a good signal to noise image to really take advantage of it. Otherwise, you will end up sharpening artifacts. And finally, I do use Photoshop for finishing touches. There really isn't a better program for combining multiple image layers. And well, I've been using Photoshop for many, many years. So I was really conversant with using it as well. So it has a lot of nice features just to finish the image. If you want a free option, GIMP is a free option. And there are some other programs as well that have come out recently, which are less expensive than Photoshop that can do similar things. So that's the basic procedure that I have been using. Okay, so here are some examples. This is the Blue Flash Planetary Nebula. This is I'm showing you the full image here. This is NGC 6905 in the constellation Delphinus. It's captured over 6 nights in September. So that was 16,000 frames of 3 and 4 seconds each. So about 14.5 hours total to take this image. I'll zoom in a bit. So here's a super zoomed in image where we're down to basically down to the pixel level in this image, just to show you some of the nice detail in this planetary nebula. So just to give you some background on this particular nebula, it's very typical. It's formed by an aging star, which initially had a mass very similar to our sun. It's about 1.2 arc minutes wide, so it's very small visually to us, but it's actually about 1.5 light years across and about 7,500 light years distant from us. So this central star then, again, which was similar mass to our sun, is too small to nova. So instead, once it runs out of gas, when it runs out of fuel, that is, it ejects its outer shell. And that's what it's done here. And it's done it kind of in a bipolar way in this case, and more in these two directions. And this expanding shell of gas is ionized by stellar UV radiation from this very hot star now. And the shell material glows due to the fluorescence. So about half the mass of the star on generally is in the planetary nebula. So the remains of the star, which you can see here, is a white dwarf, and it has a temperature of over 150,000 Kelvin. In this image, the green blue is from O3 emission from oxygen. The red is from hydrogen alpha, and In the north and south ANSI, these handles here, there's also some enhanced emission in red from nitrogen too, although it's not really terribly visible in this image. One thing I don't have is a special filter for hydrogen, for example, for hydrogen alpha. This is another planetary nebula that I worked on recently. It's called the Blue Snowball, NGC 7662 in Andromeda. This one was only 3 nights in September. It's 10,000 frames of 3 seconds each for a total of 8 hours. And again, I can zoom in here too much. You can really see pretty much every individual pixel here. This is actually one of the very brightest planetary nebula, but it's really small. It appears the size of Jupiter at opposition. So it's quite small in the telescope. But in reality, at 3,000 light years away, it's still 0.5 light years in diameter. And in this case, again, it's more blue, a little bit more blue in this case. But the bluish green is again due to oxygen, and you can see more of the red hydrogen alpha emission in this one. It seems to be a bit stronger in this nebula than in the other one. This is the final planetary nebula I'm going to show you. This one is called the Blinking Planetary Nebula. I thought it was called blinking because it sort of looks like an eyeball, but apparently it refers to the fact that if you could see it, when you see it visually, like if you're out in the country and you looked at it visually, when you use averted vision and then look straight at it, it tends to appear and disappear. So it appears to blink at you. But to me, it does look like a little eyeball. In this case, this was from 8 nights, a total of 16.5 hours from 20,000 subs of 3 seconds each. And that was my September, October, and November in this case. And here's a blow up of this planetary nebula. So it's 3,500 light years away. This core region in the center is about 0.9 light years wide, but that's less than 30 arc seconds to our view. So again, very much planetary size, very small in our view. You can see there's two quite bright patches along the long axis here and here. And these are called fast low ionization emission regions, or flyers. And obviously when this star again started losing its mass, it ejected huge amounts of gas in these 2 directions at very high velocity. So and those are those bright spots. So they're really bright because they're running into the other gas, and that's getting them very hot and excited. Now processing this was a huge challenge because the core is very bright, and I needed to get a lot of sharpening out of this in Registax to get all the detail out of the inner core. On the other hand, the rest of this outer shell is very faint here. So I really had to stretch this in Star Tools to bring out the detail in this outer shell. And of course, neither of those processes would make the stars look any good at all as well. So I had to do the stars separately. So I had 3 different layers that I had to combine in Photoshop. So the core, the outer shell, and the stars. And actually, this image was awarded a top pick selection on Astrobin in November, which is the site where I post all my images. Finally, I wanted to, I guess it would just so happen to be that there were a lot of planetary nebulas I wanted to do this fall. But I didn't want to give you the idea that's all you could do. So this isn't totally complete. This is Stefan's Quintet of Galaxies. also known as the Higgson Compact Group 92. These are actually like 300 million light years away, something like that. These are very, very distant galaxies, and they're not that big either. This is you zoomed in a fair amount from a full image size. There are a number of interesting things, though, in this image, which is, by the way, 10 nights from September, October, November, total of 18 hours. But the weather recently has really interrupted this project. So I need some clear nights early in the evening. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to probably finish this the way I'd like this year. Anyway, there's a couple of very interesting things about this image. The first is it's called Stefan's Quintet, but you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So one of these things doesn't belong, and so in fact, this bluer galaxy here, 7320, actually is about 10 times closer than the other one. So it's not actually part of the Higgson group. On the other hand, this galaxy up here in the upper left, 7320c, is part of the group. And what's interesting, and I was really happy to be able to get this, is you can see from 7319, there's a faint tail that runs out all the way here, pointing toward this galaxy. So at one point, this galaxy had a strong interaction with the galaxy at the upper left, and that pulled a lot of material out in the tail. And these two galaxies here are also interacting very strongly. There's a region up here, you can see this sort of almost an X of light here. This is a starburst region, which is just an area of intense star formation. And it's caused because of all the colliding gas between these two galaxies is just superheating this up. And in fact, there's intense X-ray emission between these two galaxies and in the starburst region. There's a lot of energy going on in these interactions. And it's thought eventually all these galaxies will merge into one because they're obviously interacting very, very strong with each other. Okay, so that's the last of my images that I took myself. But I was, Randy mentioned he'd seen my picture and realized that I was using the RAC robotic telescope data and processing it to produce images as well. So he asked me if I could say something about that. Basically what you can do from the RAC, you can purchase raw image data from Sierra remote observatories to process yourself. We have a telescope there, and I think Randy was one of the key people on the team that actually got that up and running for the RASC. The neat thing about it is the skies there aren't cloudy all day. So it's a really great to have some raw image data from a big telescope when the skies are as bad as they have been recently. So it's actually a 16-inch telescope there. And aside from the luminance and RGB filters, it has hydrogen alpha, O3, and the sulfur. And also they have an astro-modified Canon 6D at 20 millimeters of focal length. And so, for example, for $100 plus HST, you get 30 plus 2021 targets. I guess they're still adding to those. And each of those targets has 12 to 20 hours of data. So this is an example where I took the raw data and did all the calibration and followed basically the same process as I would with my own images, except now I'm using data from a much bigger telescope in dark sight and so on. And so this is the Cygnus wall in the North American Nebula. It's from 2019-2020 data that I purchased. It's a star-forming region. It's about 30 light years across and 2,600 light years away. And the palette I used here for the colors is known as the Hubble SHO. So it's a variant of sulfur is red, hydrogen alpha is green, and oxygen is blue. Actually, my image here was highlighted in this week's RASC newsletter, so maybe some of you saw it. So if people are interested, I can show more of my pictures and talk more about at a future date about how I did this and how one can do it yourself. Okay, so if there's any questions, that's all I had to talk about today.
Thanks very much, Rick. Wow, that's amazing. There are a couple questions on the chat, so I'll read them. How long does it take to process 15,000 frames into one image?
Yeah, so what I actually do is I for the deep for deep sky stacker, like doing the calibration and stacking, what I do is I stack every night, which is 1,000 or 2,000, sometimes 3,000 images. It only takes maybe a couple of hours generally. It depends on how like for the planetary nebulas, I don't use the full frame of the camera. I use a region of interest, so a smaller portion. So the files are smaller. But if it's a full frame image and I had 3,000, it might take 3 or 4 hours for the program to run. But I just, I put it on during the day or put it on overnight and it just runs and, the results there. And then what I do is those images for each night, I then combine them later in DeepSide Stacker to make the final image. And that doesn't take very long. And then I spend probably weeks working on each image just to get them the way I want them, because I go through the procedure. It's very detail oriented. So you go through and you make the image and you start looking and say, oh shoot, I messed up on step 2, right? So you have to go back and say, okay, I'll do better next time, and you work your way through it. Eventually, after the 4th or 5th time working through the image, you've got it the way you want. So that part actually takes quite a while.
So if I understand you correct, if the whole image had, say, 15,000 images,
yeah,
and you took them over 3 nights,
yeah,
then the first night you could take those 5,000 images and merge them together, stack them together.
Yep.
And the second night and then third night. And
Yep.
so at the end of that, you'd have 3 files that you could then stack together.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, yeah, so that part's really fast.
Okay.
I mean, one could go back and put them all together and stack them, but different nights have different flats and different exposures, and it's a bit of a nightmare to go back and put 8 nights together, and so it works very well that way. It's very efficient.
Okay, let me hit a few more questions here. And it looks like someone already wants a tutorial, so we'll be asking you about that. But anyway,
Okay.
How often do you collimate your setup?
Oh, okay. For the SCT, I haven't had to do it very often at all. I think I've probably only done it a couple of times. I do check it every night to make sure it looks okay. I find I don't find collimating a star too bad. I usually, when I'm aligning on Polaris, I take a look, and once the temperature is cooled down, you can get a pretty good view of the collimation. So it's pretty decent. One thing I did do, because the Celestron comes with these stupid just screws that you need a screwdriver for. So there's a place called Bob's Knobs.
Bob's Knobs, yeah.
Yeah, where you can get little thumbnail things that you can turn, which is so much easier.
Yeah, everyone should go to Bob's Knobs.
Yeah, it's so easy with the SCT. It's it's right on the front, and you just look at the star and tweak the knobs, and it doesn't take very long.
Okay. Quick question here about your trolley and your driveway.
Yep.
Assuming like anyone else's driveway, it's not flat.
Yep.
Can you level the mount, and how do you? How long does it take to pull or align?
Oh yeah, it's not bad at all. Leveling them out, I just use the normal legs as you would normally level it. So basically, you know, I'm pretty good now. You know, I just, because it's at the right altitude, so I just jig it around so it's pointed directly at Polaris, and usually it's, you know, it's within the field of view when I do that. I mean, and then as long as it's level, and I try to use about the same spot in the driveway, so often I don't have to fiddle with the level too much, because leveling is can be nasty when you've got, you know, 60 pounds of telescope above you. And the actual alignment with Sharp Cap is really super easy. It uses the same camera right through the 925, so that prime focus. It as long as Polaris is close to that field of view, it analyzes the image for you. It tells you to turn the telescope 90 degrees, and that's just to take care of, you know, any misalignment of the axis of the telescope and the telescope itself. And then it takes another image, and then it shows you, here's where you have to move this star to be this location, and you just adjust then the azimuth and altitude to hit the point it tells you to, and you're done. So typically that, you know, rolling it out, aligned to Polaris, leveling, you know, 10 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes if, you know, I bump something or do something stupid, but
Hey,
yeah, it's very quick.
do you take the tripod off the dolly then?
No. Everything is stays on. I just there, you can't see them. I have some screws underneath, and I have some vibration pads. So I just lift up the dolly a little bit and put the screw onto the vibration pad, so the wheels are not touching the ground.
Okay.
You might just be able to see the screws right there. So they're pretty close. The screws are pretty close to the ground. So if I put them on a little vibration pad, it just brings the wheel up off the ground. So it's very easy, just lifting it. Yeah, you know, you can't take the telescope on and off a wheel trolley. It just wouldn't work.
No, I understand. This is great. This is great, Rick. We very impressive. I always thought, or was told, that you needed at least 30 seconds of exposure to get anything, any real data above the noise, but you certainly have proved that that's not the case.
Well, yeah. I mean, the misconception is that you always need long exposure. For city skies, you cannot use long exposures, and it wouldn't do you any good anyway. You only need long exposures with a really dark sky.
Okay, well, thanks again. And as I say, some people are already asking you to help us with an astrophotography tutorial. So maybe sometime down the road we can set that up. Sure,
no problem.
Okay, thanks again.
Okay.
Okay, if you can unshare there, I'm going to bring on the next presenter, Denis Gasparotto, and it's a real astrophotography evening because he's going to be reviewing an astrophotography lens. So Denis, you got it.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay, good.
And I
I'm
see
using a different laptop tonight, so I'm not sure how this will work out, but hopefully you can
You're a brave
see
man.
my one screen. Okay, so first of all, Rick, that was an excellent presentation. Some remarkable images from stations, and like yourself, I'm also in light polluted sky Bortle 7, so we have to be pretty creative in the work we do. talk I'm going to give tonight, it's fairly quick review, but I have two setups. One is for more focal length images, so smaller objects, but I want a quick grab and go type imaging setup for medium range focal lengths in the range of 200 millimeters. And I've been experimenting with a variety of different systems and optics over the past few years. And you tend to get, on occasion, a lot of hype on certain types of optical systems, and mainly little refractors. So, you know, all the rage recently has been on these small refractors. And I'm getting the opinion that what's happening is they're creating these optics, and then a lot of different manufacturers get their hands on these optics and they build their own telescopes with the same optics. My experience so far is that, and I've had 3 different ones from 3 manufacturers of different focal lengths, is they're mediocre at best. And these are triplet APOs, which are supposed to be good. They're selling them relatively inexpensively, so they're attracting, you know, much people into the markets as possible. But, so I wanted to pick up a lens, and a lens that was a little bit more dedicated to astrophotography. So I recently purchased this Askar ACL 200. And fundamentally, this lens was supposed to be designed specifically for astrophotography. So it's got a number of features which are really nice. It makes the whole image acquisition process much easier. First of all, this lens, it's 200 millimeters, and it's relatively fast than an f4. So if anybody is doing some you know, quality type of astrophotography, you're going to recognize that an f4, a faster optic system, is going to suit you well, so you can get shorter exposures. Very important. The other thing that this lens has, which is quite unique, is that it has a coarse focus adjustment, seen here in the middle, and there's also a fine adjustment. As you know, focusing on an image or focusing on a star to get that precise focus is not always an easy exercise. So the more fine adjustment you have, the quicker and easier it is to obtain a really good focus. And this lens has that, which is quite unique and well worth it. The other thing then, on top of that, is it has focus locks, really handy. I've been using in previous years a Canon L series lens, which, if anybody knows, are very expensive lenses, but they don't have locking mechanisms, and I would always be losing focus, and it was a real frustrating experience using those lenses. So that's a really good feature. It has a rotatable lock, so if you need to rotate your setup, you have one locking mechanism. You can rotate the whole setup. Really good feature for doing framing. So you want to frame your image accordingly. You want to have a certain aspect of it, and that allows you to do that very easy.
Dennis?
Yeah.
We're not seeing your presentation. We're just seeing it as if it hasn't started yet.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why that's the case, because I'm actually presenting it on my end here.
You're probably not sharing the right screen.
Yeah, unshare and share again with a different screen.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to share again.
Yep.
I'm not sure why that's happening, because on mine, like I said, I'm using a new laptop, so screen share. Let me try this. Can you see any of that?
Yeah, now start your presentation.
Okay, let me go in slide mode. See that?
No, we're not seeing the presentation. We're just seeing the pre-presentation.
Really? Okay. You're not seeing any of the screens advance?
I'm not seeing the screens advance. I'm just seeing the main screen and the...
Not sure what's going on. Hang on a second here.
Why don't you start your presentation and then share the the individual slide?
Um,
Okay, there you
That
go.
one.
That's good.
There you go.
okay, not sure what happened there. Anyway, so
That's fine. So we're seeing two images of the lens.
correct. So as I was saying before, so let me just repeat quickly here. It's a 200 millimeter f4 lens, so it's fairly fast in terms of a focal ratio, which is ideal for astrophotography. You have a fine focus and a coarse focus adjustment on this lens, which is quite unique and very beneficial because it makes obtaining really good focus quickly and also easy. And then it has locking mechanisms for the focus. So if anybody is using and used to using camera lenses with these focusing rings, it's very easy to knock out a focus. So it makes this very easy to lock it on focus. You can also rotate the whole setup. So if you're framing your image, you want to get the right aspect and the right visual representation based on where you are in the sky. It allows you to rotate the whole setup. The other thing what it has, which is also unique, is it has this filter a holder. So in other words, the whole rear cell of this lens can unscrew. And in it, you have the ability to insert 48 millimeter filters. So I have LE Enhance and LE Extreme filters for to pass through H alpha and oxygen 3. And it works very well, and it's designed to accept appropriate back focus for a standard DSLR camera, which is also very handy. What you cannot do with this lens, and this is pretty key, is there's a T-ring. You need a 48 millimeter T-ring to attach to your DSLR camera. You cannot mess around with this back focus. If you do that, you will not achieve focus. So it's one thing to really be concerned about and considerate of, that if you need filters, you must use this filter holder that they have. Dew shield, it's got a nice dew shield on it, very solid construction. It's there's a lot of metal to this construction, so it's very durable, but it's also very heavy, and I'll get into that in a few minutes in considerations in terms of the heaviness of the lens. It also comes with a dovetail on the bottom for your mount attachment, and also a guide, an attachment to allow for use of guiders and also finder scopes. Can you, I just advanced the image, can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you should see a weight scale. So I was talking about the weight of this particular lens. With the camera, so I'm using a Canon T3i, which is the filter is removed, so it's modified for astrophotography. And the lens itself, it comes out to about 4.5 pounds or 5.5 pounds. So it's a hefty piece of camera lens and requires an appropriate mount. So this is not a lens that you're going to use on a small tripod and do unguided or shots with. It's just not it's not designed for that. So this is the setup that I typically use and when I recommend. And this particular setup comes with a counterweight, 5-pound counterweight. So with this, I can achieve very accurate balance, and it seems to track quite well. There's no auto guiding required here. I can go for several minutes and just track it, and it seems to do a good job. This is the SkyGuider Pro, a Fi Octron, and Manfrotto mount, and the two match quite well together. I mentioned earlier that this lens has a rear cell. So when you remove the rear cell, you can see here that it is quite easy to insert a 48 millimeter filter. And this particular filter is an LE Enhance by Optolong. And then you can see also here that is attached to the rear cell is a 48 millimeter T-ring, which will accept the my DSLR camera. And again, I use a Canon T3i. Okay, so can you see the next chart?
We can.
Okay, So again, it's I just want to go through some of the pros and cons with this particular camera and how it stacks up. So I personally, I think this camera is easy to focus compared to other standard lens with the fine focus and the fact that you can lock the focus. I do have a batten-off mask, but I find that I don't even need to use the batten-off mask with this particular fine focus. Since I'm using a Canon T3i, I have a tilt viewfinder, which on live mode I can increase to a magnification factor of 10. So then you can easily focus, bright star on there, and you should be good to go. The other thing about this lens, which is really impressive and is not the case with many other lenses, is it has pinpoint stars right to the edge. Okay, I'm using a crop sensor, not a full frame, but nevertheless, that's a pretty impressive capability. The only other lens I've been able to achieve with that is the Canon L series lens, which is about 3 times the price of this. It's optimized for f4. So the other thing, you can shoot wide open. So people will know that if you're using standard camera lenses, typically you cannot shoot wide open with some kind of artifacts at the edge. You'll need to stop your camera down to f5, 6 or more. But this one works quite well right at f4. You can stop it down if you wish, and you may want to do that if the images are very bright or you're photographing something else, maybe terrestrial imaging, which you can use this for. It also has a centralized mass to it. So although it's heavy, it's actually not difficult to balance. It's not a gangly thing. It's fairly compact. The other thing to notice, I mentioned the threaded cells on there. I think there's some manufacturing tolerance challenges there that's going on, but sometimes the threaded cells can bind. So if you screw them on too tight, you may have it very difficult to remove. I understand that is a problem they're looking into now and perhaps trying to rectify it. I don't really have too much of an issue with that, but I know some people have had some problems with that. As I mentioned before, the lens is heavy, needs to be balanced carefully, but with a centralized mass, it's not too bad. Here's a couple of examples of some images I took from, this is from my backyard in Oakville. So using the Ali enhanced filter, give you an idea of the image size. And I know you can't probably get much magnification here, but I can assure you the image, the stars right to the edge of the field are quite pinpoint. So back focus is easy to accept. Again, with this particular lens, you need to use it in a configuration that's intended to. You cannot increase the back focus. If you do that, you will not achieve proper focus. So it's one thing to keep in mind. It's a bit different than maybe some other lenses. Yeah, so these images are about 2-minute exposures, unguided. 52-minute exposures at f4. So wide open and calibrated in Deep Sky Stacker and processed in PixInsight. So I know that was a quick review, but if you have any questions, shoot.
Denis, I see the California Nebula there, I think, on the left. What's the object on the right?
So the picture the photograph on the right is the bubble, the lobster claw nebula region. So this is quite a nice area to image, and most of the time people will image this at much higher focal lengths. So you're just getting the bubble nebula part. But I wanted to get a wide field because there's lots going on in this picture. You can see M52, the bubble, there's a lobster claw, and then there's several other NGC, and there's quite a bit of nebulosity spread around the whole area.
Yeah, I'm sorry, is that Cassiopeia?
It's very close to Cassiopeia, yes.
Okay. No,
the star caps, it's very close to that star, in that region.
So I just did a quick Google and I saw about $850 for the lens. Is that about?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's quite reasonable.
Okay, so some people are asking, will you take 600? I'll just ignore that one. Any chromatic aberration from the lens?
So good question. I was going to cover that, but I forgot. No, as a matter of fact, most of the most of the small refractors and lenses that are made today are pretty darn good when it comes to minimal chromatic aberration. This particular lens has none that I can see.
Okay. And one question from Robert about taking a 2-inch filter.
So I guess 48 millimeters is as close as you're going to probably get to the 2-inch. So all my filters are 2-inch, considered 2-inch filters, but the threads are measured exactly to 48 mils.
Okay. And question about the focal length, adjustable? I would assume not, but
No.
okay.
I wish it was, but if you're going to start allowing for various focal lengths, then it really complicates the optics. And I'm glad they didn't do that here, because I think there's often a compromise when you have lenses that have varying focal lengths. So it's just one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Once you start zooming the lens, then you lose on the quality.
Yeah.
Denis, that was amazing. I love these shots. I'd like to see more of them.
Yeah, I wish, I wish we had some clear sky. Like, we do have pockets of clear sky, but I empathize with Rick, because when you're doing this sort of thing, you need like clear skies for an extended period of time, and it hasn't been cooperating.
Well, you've got the equipment now, my friend. You're all set.
Yeah.
And,
we'll have to try some more. Yeah, and you know what? I like the fact that now we have the technology that we can do photography from our backyards in light polluted areas. Not ideal.
Yeah.
I much prefer going to dark skies, but when you can't, and you don't want to drive. I just, gone are the days for me where I'll drive 2.5 hours to a dark sky and then come back at 4 in the morning. I just don't do that anymore.
No, it's, I agree with you. All right, thanks again, Denis.
You're welcome.
Super. Thank you very much for that presentation. All right. The last presentation is sort of a late edition, and I thought I would give a quick presentation, which is about something near and dear to my heart. And that's going to be the Apollo 17 mission. How does that look to everybody? Can somebody give me a heads up?
Perfect. Good.
Okay, good. All right. As many of you know, I'm an Apollo geek, and at this time of year, I always think back to what I was doing when I was in high school this time of year in 1972, and it was the last Apollo mission to the moon. I hate to think that it's 49 years ago, but anyway, that's what it is. So this was the last mission to the moon, and it's been 49 years, and it's going to be another several years before people go back to the moon. But this mission was actually, it wasn't meant to be the last mission. It was the Apollo 20 was meant to be the last mission, but there were cutbacks. After Apollo 11, the plans were to go to Apollo 20, and then after Apollo 13, there were cutbacks. And anyway, Apollo 17 was the last go. So Gene Cernan was the commander. He'd been on a Gemini mission and an Apollo mission, so he was in charge, and he had above and to the left is Jack Schmitt, who was a geologist and who actually wasn't planned to be on the flight. The way it worked was the crews served on a backup as a backup to a mission, and then they skipped 2 missions and they flew as prime. So this Cernan and Ron Evans, who was standing behind Cernan there, he was the command module pilot. They were backups to the Apollo 14 mission, but Joe Engel, who was an X-15 pilot and ultimately a shuttle pilot, he was the pilot who on the second shuttle mission, who commander of that mission where they flew the first Canadarm. He was all set to fly with Cernan and Evans to the moon on Apollo 17. But when the missions were cut, there was a great cry to put a geologist on one of the Apollo missions. And ultimately, Jack Schmitt, who would have been on Apollo 19, was moved into Joe Engle's place and flew on Apollo 17. So very unfortunate for Joe and very fortunate for Jack. So the flight launched early morning on December 7th. They were actually scheduled to go at about 9:30 in the evening on December 6th, but a ground support system failure forced a 2.5-hour delay. Nothing wrong with the rocket or anything, but they didn't get off until late at night, 12:30 in the morning on December 7th. And so I was a little bleary-eyed when I went into school on that day. So they landed on December 11th, which is tomorrow, and they splashed down December 19th. They had 3 moonwalks, a total of 22 hours walking on the moon. They had a car, the third of the 3 lunar rovers on the moon. They drove the farthest distance, 35.5 kilometers, and they brought back lots of rocks and lunar samples. So here is their insignia, and very symbolic, showing the god Apollo and the American eagle touching the moon and heading off to the planets and the galaxies. So a lot of interest in the future, but by about that time, it's very interesting. You know, after Apollo 11, everyone was going, well, we're going to go to the moon, we're going to go to Mars, everything's going to be great. And then by the time of Apollo 17, everyone thought, well, how long will it be will we get back to the moon? And some people actually mentioned 50 years. And it was very prophetic, of course, because next year will be the 50th anniversary and we're still not back to the moon.
Excuse me, Randy, there's a green cross on the screen. Crosshair?
I don't see it.
No? Okay. Am I the only one?
Yeah, very special.
Okay. Lucky me.
No,
I see it
I
as
can
well.
see it.
It's
There.
there.
Well,
I'm special as well.
I see
It's
it
there.
too, this green cross.
Where?
Yeah, Randy's got a Mac, you know, they do that.
Okay, yeah.
Right on the center engine right now.
Yeah.
Right there?
Yep.
All right, well, that's a very
Mac.
special feature of a Mac presentation, I guess. I hope it doesn't deter too much. So this is an idea. I like this picture because you know, the Saturn V was always just such a huge beast, and gives you an idea of what the first stage looked like as they processed it in the vehicle assembly building. So this was, you know, they knew how to land on the moon. They'd done it 5 times already. So this was really a focus on what science could they get out of the moon. And here's Gene Cernan practicing drilling into the moon, where they would then insert an experiment to measure the heat flowing out of the moon. This is kind of a fun offshoot story. When I first saw this picture, I wondered, well, what's going on here? This is a guy. His name is Fritz Weidick. He worked at Kennedy Space Center on all of the Apollo missions, and in the operations and checkout building, this is where you see the astronauts walk out to go to the van, to go to the pad. This is the same building. And they had a clean room area where they processed all the command service modules and lunar modules and all the experiments and everything. And they even had a vacuum chamber where they could stick things in and test them in a vacuum. So this is a picture of Fritz, and he was involved with the checkout of the Lunar Rover and the LEM and everything before they you know, packed it all up and sent it out to the pad. And here he has 2 casts on his wrists. And a buddy of mine told me about Fritz. He said, well, yeah, of course, the astronauts and the support crew would play baseball. And Fritz one day dove into second base and broke both of his wrists during one of these fun baseball games. And I didn't, you know, I thought, oh, that's a great story. And I actually looked him up and visited him one day when I was down for a shuttle launch. And in fact, that was the story. So these guys can go ahead and play, you know, super baseball and slide headfirst into the bases. But I don't think an astronaut who was planning to go to the moon would chance that. Although I know that 3 months before Apollo 17 flew, and it's in Gene Cernan's book, he wrecked his leg and he nearly needed an operation, and nearly the backup crew flew on Apollo 17. So the moral of the story is, when you are heading to the moon in a few months, don't play baseball and don't do anything that could damage your leg or anything to prevent you from flying. So this is what it looked like in the operation checkout building. There's Challenger, the lunar module, all opened up, all being checked out. There's the crew of Cernan and Schmidt in their flight suits in the rover, checking everything out before it's all packaged up and sent to the pad. Now, I really, really wish I had taken this photograph, because this is on December 6th, 1972, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because the launch was supposed to be about 9:30 at night. And man, oh man, Roy Bishop, who was a handbook editor of the Observer's Handbook for 20 years, actually did go down and see the launch. And in fact, if you go back and look, I think the 2000 handbook cover has a picture that he took before the Apollo 17 launch. But I saw the first shuttle night launch, and I had a chance to talk to people there who saw the Apollo 17 launch, and they said it was nothing like the Apollo 17 launch. It was just an amazing show of, because the Saturn V's just took forever to get off the pad and get out, get on their way. Shuttles were like little pop guns. They just popped off the pad and they were gone before you knew it. But because of the alignment of the moon and the Earth and everything, this was the one and only night launch of a Saturn V, and the last manned launch of the Saturn V rocket. And there are plans to launch a rocket in February, the SLS-1, which will have more thrust and power than the Saturn V. So that's something to look forward to in a couple months. After they left lunar orbit and Earth orbit and headed out to the moon, the alignment just put them into the position where they could get a view of the full Earth. And this was really the first time an Apollo crew had seen a full Earth on the way to the moon. And it's kind of neat. This was, again, this time of year, and it's interesting to see Antarctica tilted towards the sun, so they're getting full sun. And many of you saw the pictures of the solar eclipse that took place a week ago today down near Antarctica off the coast of South America. So anyway, that's always been a very, very cool picture. This is the blue planet picture and everything. And on our trip to see the 2017 solar eclipse, we were in Idaho Falls, and they had this traveling Apollo exhibit at the museum, and they had the camera that took that picture. So that was kind of cool, because this was the camera that was in the command module. Well, they shouldn't have a picture of an astronaut on the moon, because this camera stayed in the command module and most likely took that full Earth picture. So around the moon, they undocked 49 years ago tomorrow. And there is the command service module. The name of that was America. You can see the docking probe, really clear view of that. And in the service module area, you see an open area where you see a whole bunch of blocky stuff or whatever. Those are all cameras. And the last 3 Apollo missions, the service module had what they called the sim bay, that full of cameras, high resolution photography, and experiments. And the command module pilot, who stayed in lunar orbit during the time when the astronauts were on the moon, his job was to operate these cameras and take high resolution pictures of various areas of interest on the moon. On the way back from the moon, there was a spacewalk, and he actually climbed outside of the through the hatch here, and he actually climbed. You see some handrails, and you even see this area here where he can slip his feet in. They call those the golden slippers. He did a spacewalk to retrieve all the film magazines, because this entire structure here, the service module, burnt up on re-entry. So he had to retrieve his film from all of that. So after they separated, the command service module went into a lower orbit slightly, and went ahead of the LEM. And you can see the command service module there ahead of the lunar module. And there's actually movie footage of this, which is kind of cool. But this is the landing site. So this is one orbit before the the astronauts turned on the engine on the lunar module and fired the engine and descended down to the moon. So they landed on the moon about mid-afternoon, if I remember correctly. And later that night, when it got dark, I got out my telescope and took a picture of the moon. And the Terminator is just past the landing site, which was just about there. And so there are 2 people on the moon there and 1 person going around it. So later that evening, it was a Monday night. I remember that because Cernan during it asked about the Monday night football score. They unloaded the Lunar Rover and he gave it a test drive, and they set up the experiment package, set up the flag, and before they headed out to go ahead and do their work, they outfitted the Lunar Rover with all their experiments and their tools, and a camera which gave just great live views of the views. Wherever they went, they traveled over 30 kilometers on the mission. They had this antenna which would send back live views from the TV camera, so you could actually see what was going on as they did it. A friend of mine is an artist, and he and I several years ago sat down and looked at all the video and all the photographs, and he painted this for me, this rendition of what was going on during the first moonwalk of Apollo 17. So here's Cernan near the rover, I think probably during the first moonwalk, getting set up, and already you can see how dirty his suit is. So during the three moonwalks, there are specific places where the astronauts were scheduled to go. They would park their rover, they'd climb out, they'd walk around and look for various targets of opportunity, various rocks that they thought they would be able to see at the various sites. This panoramic shot shows one of the second moonwalk sites, which was one of the most interesting. It's a place called Shorty Crater, and there you can see Jack Schmitt working at the Lunar Rover, and just in the middle you can see a little black cross. These were crosses that were part of the camera system, and they were imprinted on the film to give people the ability to make measurements afterwards on the photographs. But you can see just to the right of that cross, you can see a little bit of reddish tint. Well, this was the discovery of orange soil on the moon. This was a big thing at the time. They didn't know what they had here. Ultimately, they determined that it was about 3.8 billion year old volcanic glass, when the whole valley that they were in was just a volcanic eruption. So that's kind of neat. And that's this little object here is called the gnomon, and they would place it beside a sample site, and it has a color grid there to calibrate the color. And this little vertical thing here actually is has a base where it would tilt back and forth, and then it would stop where the local vertical is. So it was something that they used quite a bit for their samples. So another picture of Cernan near the Lunar Rover. It's amazing how efficient the rover was. They would be going up these very, very steep hills, and they wouldn't even feel it. The rover would be just gripping into the soil. And the interesting thing about the wheels, and the design of the Lunar Rover wheels was quite a question. What would you make it out of? And they ultimately made them out of piano wire. And the fact is, through all their testing, that worked, and it just did a great job. So here's their Lunar TV camera, and this whole system here was their communications and TV system. And as they drove, these big showers of lunar dust would come up, and every time they stopped the rover, Cernan had to get out with a brush and brush off all of the panels on these systems to prevent them from getting too hot. So it was really a pain. He really got annoyed whenever Houston asked them to get the brush out and brush off all the lunar soil. So here's a picture of the Lunar Rover after a moonwalk, after the astronauts were back inside for the night. And you'll notice on one of the rover wheels here, this contraption, Cernan accidentally knocked off one of the coverings here, one of the covers for the wheels, and they were getting a whole bunch of lunar dust kicked up because of that. And so overnight, Houston had worked on the problem. Actually, John Young, who had been on the Apollo 16 flight, he came up with this idea of taking some lunar maps from the lunar module and some clamps that they had to clamp lunar maps and checklists within the LEM, and a little bit of duct tape, and they put together this this protective cover to shield them from the lunar dust. And it worked for the rest of the mission. And it worked so well that they took it off and they brought it back. So if you ever go to the Air and Space Museum, you can see the Apollo 17 lunar rover protective cover there. So one of the things they found with these later missions, where they spent 7 hours at a time outside the lunar module, is the dust. And this is a picture of Cernan inside the lunar module, and it's very small in there. I don't know how but two guys got in there with backpacks and spacesuits, but anyway, they did, and they all grimy, covered with this lunar dust. And if you look at the Cernan's spacesuit in the Air and Space Museum, you'll see that they did their best to vacuum off the lunar dust, but it'll always be dirty like this. So the rover had the capability of sending back TV even during the lunar liftoff. And for the 3 missions where they had a rover, they have TV coverage of when the astronauts blasted off the moon and went back into orbit to rendezvous with the command service module. So they docked and they transferred all their equipment and samples and souvenirs to the command service module, and ultimately the ascent stage of the lunar module was directed back to crash near the landing site so that it would give the seismometer experiment something to register, and they'd learn more about the internal aspects of the lunar the moon. So a few days after that, they were back on the Earth, and the Apollo missions were over, and they would, I guess everyone would look forward to the Skylab missions, which would take place in 1973, and the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975, and then ultimately the shuttle missions. So there are a lot of resources online if you're interested in Apollo 17. All of the video is available probably online. I have it on DVD. A company called Spacecraft Films made this available. But all the transcripts are online. All the photos that were taken are available. There are audio files. There's YouTube. There are mission reports. And there's something called Apollo 17 in real time. And many of you may remember a meeting that we had several years ago. I think it might have even been around 2012. But there was a fellow named Ben Feist who created this website. And essentially, it is all of the audio and video throughout an entire mission. So you can start it at the beginning of the Apollo 17 mission, and you can listen to the entire mission and see all the video. And I've got it running right now, but I think right now the astronauts were on the backside of the moon. They're still in lunar orbit 49 years ago tonight, and maybe getting close to a sleep period. But check out Apollo 17 in real time, and even run it over the weekend, especially tomorrow night during the first EVA, which takes place around 8, 9 o'clock. But it's an amazing resource, and it's kind of neat to relive it. I should say that during the actual mission, they did not show the live coverage. For the 3 EVA nights, I stayed up late. They delayed Johnny Carson 1/2 hour. And between 11:30 and midnight, they gave a video highlights or summary of what had gone on. So by the time of the last lunar mission, there was no way they were going to preempt primetime TV like the Monday Night Football game. So it was great to get my hands on the actual video years later to see what actually happened. But if you can believe it, by the time the last Apollo, although the last EVA, the last few minutes of the last men on the moon, they did cover it live, but that was about it. So the Apollo 17 crew today, this is actually a picture taken about 9 years ago at an event down in Florida, when there were a heck of a lot more Apollo astronauts alive then than there are now. And unfortunately, several have left us. Jack Schmidt, who you see in the middle there with the glasses, he was down at a conference at Western a few years ago. They have a planetary geology department down there. So he was involved with that. But the 2 other crew members, Gene Cernan and Ron Evans, are no longer with us. Gene wrote a book called The Last Man on the Moon, which was turned into a movie. And actually there was a documentary film festival a few years ago, and he came up for that, and they showed the movie. But that has to be like 4 or 5 years ago right now, because he's been gone for a couple of years now. So the great thing about the L-Cross mission was the lunar reconnaissance was the ability to look down on the landing sites and see what's left there. And you can see the descent stage of the lander. You can see where the rover is, and various tracks made by the rover and by the astronauts, the flag. There's a lot of debate as to whether all the flags are still up and flying, but and actually you can see the rover tracks and all of the lunar sample experiment deployment. So it's kind of fun to look back. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll take any questions that you might have.
Excellent talk, Randy. Love the detail.
Okay.
By the way, I'm reading this.
How are you?
I'll let you know how it is. It's Apollo 18, which never did fly, so it's fiction, but it's a good book.
Well, there was actually an Apollo 18 movie, which was
Terrible.
I would just call it interesting.
Yeah.
Randy, is it true that Schmidt wouldn't get back in, come back? He was at that the final picture you had. He's at a big, huge rock.
Oh yeah.
And mission control was trying to get him to, it was right at the end of the final walk. No, I remember something about that.
Oh no, I don't. That's the first I've heard of it. So I think they were all interested in getting back. But yeah, no. Actually Cernan's book is interesting. As you can imagine, the crew had worked closely with Engel, and they were all set to go on Apollo 14 if necessary. And then to have, it's interesting too, Cernan, not long before Apollo 14, which was in January 71, he was flying a helicopter along the Banana River. And we're not sure why he crashed it, but there was some speculation that he might have been interested in some of the sites along the beach. But anyway, he crashed the helicopter and nearly killed himself. He just barely, there was flame on the water and everything, and he just barely got out, and his helmet was all burned. And he thought, there was such, they already knew that the Apollo 18 crew, which had been the Apollo 15 backup crew, which had Schmidt on it, might even take the Apollo 17 mission because it had the geologists. And so Cernan thought that, if anything could go wrong, then he might lose the mission. And then he crashes a helicopter in the Banana River in January 1971. And so he thought that was it. He thought he would lose the mission. And of course, at that point, you know, he and Engel and Evans are wondering what's going to happen. And Deke Slayton was the fellow who made the decisions for all those things. And he could very easily have said that the backup crew of Apollo 15 with the geologists will fly on Apollo 17. But he didn't. He said to Cernan, you can fly with Ron Evans, but Jack Schmitt will replace Joe Engel. And, you know, there was this, Cernan was wondering if he was going to, you know, take this. And ultimately he said, well, do I want to fly to the moon? And so he accepted it. But yeah, I actually had a chance to sit with Joe Engel once, and I asked him about that. And he was, well, he was very magnanimous, but I mean, you know, he was this close to going to the moon and he didn't go. And anyway, but the story about Jack Schmitt, no. But the question here is, did the mission get better geological samples than the others? Having a geologist on the flight was a big benefit. There's no doubt about it. He annoyed the other crew members because he was just always I mean, on the way to the moon, all he would do is look back at the Earth and make meteorological comments. And Cernan and Evans kept looking at each other like, what is this guy doing? You know, but he was a scientist and he was in this amazing environment, and I was just playing the Apollo real time, and they're still in lunar orbit, and Schmitt is just yakking about all these different things that he's seeing. But that's the whole point of going to the moon for science. You know, it's interesting. I had a chance to meet Gene Shoemaker once, who was you know, one of the guys who trained the Apollo astronauts, and he said, well, you know, Kennedy said go to the moon and come back. He didn't say anything about taking a car or bringing back rocks or doing science. And the scientists really had to push for all these experiments and all, you know, even a geologist to go onto the moon to bring back science from Apollo. And, you know, the mission was better off with Schmitt for sure. Are you tracking the details around the return to the moon? From Keith. Yeah, sorta. You know, the previous president said 2024. That was based on no facts. Latest I heard is 2025. I'm putting my money on 2027. The main spacecraft to get people to the moon hasn't launched yet. It's been in development for 10 years. It's going to be launched unmanned for the first time in February. It's called the Artemis 1 mission, and we'll see. But yeah, it's, I'm afraid the same reasons for why the latter Apollo missions were canceled is why we still aren't back to the moon. People are still looking for a reason to go. And so they're not getting the money to do it. And even though there are all these Artemis Accords, Canada's part of it, Mexico just signed, Australia just signed, you know, I think it's really a been there, done that kind of thing. And it'll happen, but it's just not going to happen all that soon, I'm afraid.
Hey, Randy, could I show you something?
Sure.
Okay, here's the, can you see this?
There it is.
Observer's Handbook 2000.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, and the back has the exact same picture. Like now they have a different picture on front and back, but in 2000 they had the same one on both sides, like Roy Bishop.
Yeah, so that's from Titusville, looking across the Banana River. You can just barely see the mobile service structure on the right-hand side. And it was an interesting evening, obviously, with the lightning going on. But yeah, it would, yeah, if I could go back in time, I think that would be one of the times I'd go back to see that go. Thanks, Chris, for pulling that out.
Sure.
That's great.
Sure.
Yeah, Roy told me all about that, and I should have got my dad to drive me down, but oh well. All right, if there are no other questions, thanks a lot, everybody. This was a great meeting. Just a few notes. We have a council meeting on Tuesday, so we'll be having our last council meeting of the year. So we'll be reporting on that in the next messenger. We do have a vacancy on council, and so the nominations committee will be looking for someone to come on to council. So if you have any interest in even finding out what's involved, please send me a note. I'd be glad to tell you. But it would be great to get some new blood on council as we move into the new year. We have our AGM on February 25th, and that will be an evening where we the council reports to the the membership on 2021 and the various things that have gone on. Obviously very COVID-centric. I don't have any news for you as to when we will be back at UTM, but it won't be, I have a funny feeling it won't be before the summer, but I think things are going well with the online meetings. Swapna and I have put together some really interesting presentations for the new year. We've actually nearly got our entire winter and spring program set up, and we've got some a lot of interesting presentations set up. So look forward to that. Any questions or comments before we close things off tonight?
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, everyone.
Same to you, Lukash. Thanks for bringing along Santa. That was great.
No problem.
Hopefully next year we'll be able to get together face to face and share some treats and ring in the new year. But anyway, things that we're moving along. Actually, I should report that we're up to about 207 members, which is the highest that the center has ever been. So things are going well, and keep it up. So with that, I'll say good night. Thanks again for coming out, everybody.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks again to the presenters.
Yep.
Great presentations. Thanks. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye. Thank you.
Francine, good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you, Michael Jackson.